Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I'm here with a jam-packed episode for you today. I am going to be going over all of the major, Vikings free agency signings. So anybody who got over $5 million, and I guess Jordan Mason technically wasn't a free agent, but it'll include Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, Isaiah Rodgers, and Jordan Mason. In my film review for kind of what I want to go over here. So uh I've been working slowly at it. I've been a little bit busy over the last few weeks, since we signed all of these guys to get film studies done on everybody. And I have the results of that here with pretty major scouting reports. If you want to see like a word version of these scouting reports, I'll have an article coming out on Zone Coverage. I have a full one out on Will Fries that released last week, so you can check that out on Zone Coverage under their Vikings section. And then I'll also have one that kind of goes over 3 plays from each of the other guys and talks about them and goes over, most of my scouting report. I'm going to be a little bit more in depth here on the pod. I'm probably going to skeet some things as well, some video as well, but I don't have as much video on all of these guys as I would typically do for a Vikings game because I was watching a lot of it via NFL Pro, and it's a little bit more of a hassle for me to like try to screen record that as it is to chop something up if I have an MP4 file. So it's just a little bit more work, and I honestly didn't feel like going through that kind of work for each of these guys, but I have copious detailed notes, and I kind of wanted to go through them here with you to give you a full idea of what I think of each of the guys the Vikings added this offseason. So or at least all of the guys the Vikings added who I expect to be significant contributors, right? I don't think if you look at guys like Jeff Okudah or Tavierre Thomas or Eric Wilson or things like that, guys might play significant snaps on special teams. I don't think they're going to get significant snaps as like starter level players unless somebody gets injured or there are really multiple injuries in a few of those cases. Let's jump back and before I caveat myself to death again and dive right into it with Will Fries. Fries obviously was the biggest money free agent that the Vikings added this offseason to start at right guard from them. He comes from the Indianapolis Colts. And, he also came over with Ryan Kelly. So some of this stuff may apply to both of them and it might be intermingled. I'll do Ryan Kelly next, who is the center for the Colts. Fries was a 7th round draft pick. He was like picked something like 10th from the bottom from the Mr. Irrelevant in the draft. And he really worked his way up over 4 years with the Colts to become a full-time starter. And, was a full-time starter in his 3rd year, I believe, and then was off to a really, really good start in 2025 before breaking his tibia, which obviously put him out for the rest of the season. Given that it was a bone injury, like a break, rather than a soft tissue injury or some sort of ligament tear or something, I would expect him to get fully back to full strength. Like I don't really see any long-term concern. Obviously, a leg break is maybe a little bit more, and a tibia break is more significant than like, I don't know, you break your arm or have a bone in your wrist break or something like that. But all the reports seem to be that Fries is going to be fine, and the Vikings have made a history on betting on injury. So I kind of, and it's worked out really well for them, right? So I kind of trust their judgment on this. But if I get into the scouting report here, I think the number one thing that stands out is that he and his teammates on the Colts line, and that would be Braden Smith was their right tackle, but also Ryan Kelly is their center, consistently get significant push on double teams in the run game, right? There are like many, many examples of them taking opposing defensive linemen, pushing them back multiple yards, and able to even come off that and get to the second level defender, right? So I posted a clip and it was probably the best one that was him and Braden Smith driving back Montez Sweat, where he eventually ends up one-on-one on Montez Sweat and like basically pushes him out of the end zone, out of the back of the end zone when they started on the 5-yard line. Like he just drives him back and back and back. It was at least halfway through the end zone, a massive amount of push. And the two games I really watched in depth for Fries were against the Bears and Colts, right? Obviously opponents that the Vikings are intimately familiar with. So it's good to see him against players that the Vikings have played for a long time and, are going to be going up against next year as well. So it's really cool to see him able to do that and get significant push on those guys. He did it a bunch to Gervon Dexter. He did it a bunch to, I think there were even reps against Kenny Clark, but Devontae Wyatt and TJ Slayton, I think they got good push on as well. So a wide range of opponents there, or a wide range of maybe different skill levels and strength, especially in run defense. But TJ Slayton's like a really good run defender, right? That's why he got a $10 million a year contract from the Bengals. So I feel really good about his ability to get movement, and I think it stems from his great foot drive after he makes contact, right? So he will make contact, get his hands into the chest of the opponent in the run game, and then consistently drive his feet and push and force that opponent down the field. I think that's really kind of what unlocks his power there. The one thing, and this is kind of a negative, right? And this shows up in the run game, is his pad level sometimes. So he is 6'6", like he's a really tall player for an interior offensive lineman, right? And we've talked about this in the past, where it can be difficult for guys who are 6'6" to get down low and really drive. And I do see that sometimes with Fries. DeMarcus Walker got him good a couple of times where he got up underneath his pads and was able to disengage in the run game or kind of get inside of him. So I think there are some pad levels there, right? Pad level issues there. Like it's not perfect, but I think generally he's got really good power in the run game, and generally is pretty consistent in latching onto players. I also think, and I mentioned this a tiny bit earlier, that he does really well to come off of double teams and latch on to second level defenders. So this is a particular skill, and it's something the Vikings over the past couple of years have struggled with at times in terms of the ability to not only drive a guy back, and they were okay at that, but then one of the two players on the double team has to get off of the block and actually block a linebacker at the second level, right? So he was really able to do that against safeties in the Packers game, up to linebackers like Tremaine Edmonds in the Bears game, where he's just able to, work as part of that drive that defender multiple yards off the ball, and then come off of that and block a linebacker out of the way where they're prevented from being able to make the play. I think that's just a really important skill for an offensive lineman to have. Obviously, it's what turns 3-yard gains into 10-yard gains, 8, 9, 10-yard gains, and maybe even more explosive if you're able to if the running back's able to make a safety miss in the hole or something like that. So really thought that was a positive. Also in the run game, I wouldn't say he's like a super athlete for the position. Like he's a good athlete, but he's not a Garrett Bradbury level mover, right? Where he's going to be executing ridiculous reach blocks that Bradbury was able to do. But he still consistently executed the reach blocks he was asked to on tape by the Colts. So I think it's very much a positive in that regard, if it's not necessarily like a plus athleticism, if that makes sense. So as a reach blocker is able to reach, like 1 techniques and 5 techniques and that sort of thing, and really has the athleticism to be able to do that if it's not an elite level. So on top of that, the thing I was really, really impressed by was his ability to target second level defenders when released from the line of scrimmage, right, as not part of a double team. He was really able to get up, and there was one rep in particular where the run was to the left. TJ Edwards was a stack linebacker, who was over the center, I would say, in terms of his alignment, right? So he needs to go over a full gap and cut off TJ Edwards before he's able to get to the ball. And he did that on a run to the left, right? So away from him. as the right guard. I thought that was really impressive. I thought his ability to get downfield on screens and target players, which is more of a spatial understanding or like a movement understanding. Obviously, it requires athleticism, but there's also an ability to find the target and predict where they're going to be that I thought was really good with him. So I liked that quite a bit. So yeah, run game, I thought really positive, like a plus level player, especially with his power to drive defenders out the ball, adequate or more than adequate athleticism to execute reach blocks, get to second level defenders. Really good job at spatially understanding where defenders are going to be. So like from the mental side of things, I think it was really positive. If I flip it over to the pass pro game, the thing that stood out to me was really technical and good hand usage. He has the ability to reset his hands multiple times within a rep. He just and Luke Braun over at Locked On Vikings did an episode where he actually talked about how Will Fries has like a bit of a martial arts background, or one of the trainers that he worked with in college did a lot of martial arts, and that is part of a contributor to his hand usage. I had identified good hands prior to listening to that episode from him. So I do feel pretty positive about that identification. And I think we're in agreement there, where he does a really good job of resetting his hands, keeping his hands inside the frame of the opponent, using his hands to control his opponent, which is pretty critical, but also able to combat any sort of hand usage and moves that his opponents will use and reset and get himself in a good place. I think he's a relatively powerful player. I talked about his ability to move players in the run game. I also think he has a good anchor, where he allows himself to catch bull rushes and prevent them from, compressing the pocket on the quarterback. I don't think that was something that like Ed Ingram was like terrible at, but I do think it's something that's kind of refreshing for the Vikings line in general, just because I feel like they've struggled with the more powerful rushers over, the course of many years. One of the things I will say is negative, but I think he kind of makes up for it a little bit, is he has the tendency to overset outside. He's pretty aggressive getting with his first step, and a lot of the times it's the right move, right? Where a defender, especially a 3 technique, is trying to attack him to the outside shoulder, he's able to push them up and around the arc, use good hands and body positioning to make them not impact the quarterback at all. But there are times where he gets a little too far outside and his opponent can get the inside edge on him and use quickness to win inside. The one significant pressure I saw was a result of that overset. There was also another play that certainly got categorized as a pressure. I believe it was against the Packers. It was on a play fake, and I actually thought it was a really good job and recovery by Fries. So I was happy with the overall result of the play. What it was is, the defender starts out a 3 technique, steps across his face, and he's really quick to be able to recover inside, push the defender, get his body in the way in between him and Richardson. The thing was, on the play fake, it was kind of a mesh handoff between Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, and Richardson took a significant couple steps to his left, right? So at the start of the play, he was lined up on the hash. That's where the ball was, so it was snapped directly back to him. He takes a couple steps, so he's like 1 to 2 yards inside the hash, and that's where Fries is when he's walling off this defender, right? So this defender goes way left, past the center into the area where the left guard might be if he had gotten fully knocked back. And Richardson is kind of right there. Richardson has to step back to his right and then step up in the pocket, which he's able to do, and he throws the ball out. So it was almost certainly logged as a pressure. But it really wasn't Fries' fault, because, at some level, the defender's going to try to cross to your face and go that lateral. You have to follow him and use your position to get him out of the way. And that's what he did. If it was a straight drop back where Richardson had dropped straight back, he would have just had a normal climb up into the pocket. Fries would have walled him off. It wouldn't have been really particularly close to where Richardson was. So I think it was a good rep overall. And I was pretty happy with that. The other thing that showed up is, he, I think, is a really smart player in pass protection when it comes to stunts and defending, that sort of thing. The Bears tended to rush pretty straight up, but the Packers ran, I don't know, like it felt like 15 stunts from a pass rush perspective. And he and Kelly picked up almost every single one. I do believe they let one through, and it was one where he kind of overcommitted to his block, but also, and that was with Braden Smith, I believe, where he overcommitted to the defensive tackle who was crashing outside, and there was a looper coming around in front of him, right? But also the ball in that situation was out in quick game. So there's some scenarios where the lineman will know that the ball is going to come out quickly, and they can overcommit a little bit on a stunt because the ball has to be out based on the timing of the play. And even if it looks like a pressure where they let a guy run up free up the middle, it's not really all that much of a pressure because they knew the quarterback was going to be able to get rid of the ball. So, he and Kelly were really good at passing off stunts and picking up stunts and blitzes and that sort of thing. There was one play that really stood out to me against the Bears where safety was blitzing from depth. Will Fries is blocking the defensive tackle. And Kelly are sliding to the right with Braden Smith, right? Braden Smith's blocking the defensive end. So Fries is able to see the safety blitz from depth, trust Ryan Kelly to his inside to take over the defensive tackle and pass off that pass protection block and get out to the safety who's blitzing from depth. I thought it was a really, really nice rep and a really good showcase of how the two work together to, just make, just keep the quarterback safe, right? Which is something we've really seen the Vikings struggle with over the years, whether it was on the left side, especially with Cam Robinson and Blake Brandel in there, but on the right side, Ed Ingram and Garrett Bradbury, when they were faced with stunts, really struggled to pick those up on a consistent basis. So I'm really excited and looking forward to that combination with the Vikings of center and right guard being a lot more solid against stunts this coming year. The other thing you notice with Fries, and I maybe I should have rolled this into his foot drive after contact and his ability to like push defenders downfield, but he's willing to finish guys and fall on top of them too. There was a really fun pancake he had against Kenny Clark, who, this is his set outside. Clark was trying to rush to his outside. He wins with his hands, dumps him in the dirt, and falls on top of him. It was just a lot of fun to see, and he's consistently having those finishes and pancaking guys on tape. So I was really happy to see that, right? Because it's just like an attitude that you love your offensive lineman to have. So that's pretty much the whole picture on Fries, right? I think he's a powerful player. I think he's a good run blocker. I think he's got solid athleticism, especially with his ability to target players on the second level. If it's not, like the elite zone blocking that you might see is like ideal, right, from some of the faster players in the league. I think he's a really good pass protector with good hand usage and a good anchor, but does have the tendency to get beat by oversetting a little bit. And he's really good against stunts and a really cerebral player in terms of understanding how the rush is going to unfold from his opponent. So that's kind of my elevator pitch for him right there. And I'll flip it over to Ryan Kelly, right? Ryan Kelly, I already talked about his ability to pick up stunts basically in the Will Fries section. I think he does it really well and seamlessly. And it makes sense for a guy who, is in his 30s now, but was a 4-time Pro Bowler. I think at least 1-time All-Pro, or at least a second-team All-Pro at some point in his career. Obviously, he's a little bit beyond his prime in that case. He also struggled with injury issues last year. I mean, that's a common theme for literally every single one of these players. Maybe not Isaiah Rodgers, but he has his own problems. Like 5 out of these 6 players had significant injury issues last year, right? So that's always going to be a question. But from a pass protection perspective, I think that Kelly, does a really good job against quickness. Like I don't, and he didn't lose that I saw a one-on-one rep really quickly in pass protection, right? Where Garrett Bradbury would just get embarrassed sometimes because a guy would rip across him, cross his face, and be running straight at the quarterback. That, to me, didn't seem to happen to Ryan Kelly over the course of the games that I watched. As far as an anchor, like I thought he had pretty good anchor technique in terms of how he, hops backwards or works one foot after the other, depending on the situation. He's got really good strain where he's able to bend his back backwards and slow a defender down. Um, but he also, doesn't have probably the power that he used to have or the stopping power that he used to have, because he will get pushed back into the quarterback's lap in those situations. The thing is, and the key is, it happens a lot slower than it used to happen for Garrett Bradbury. And I think that's the number one key, right? Like, he'll have some losses in pass protection. I think almost every center in the league is going to have some losses, especially against power from bigger players like an Andrew Billings he was going against, or Kenny Clark that you're going against. 330 pound plus guys are going to be able to overpower to some extent a center who's 20 pounds lighter than them, and I think Ryan Kelly's on the heavier end for centers. But like I said, the key is not getting embarrassed in those situations and putting your quarterback in a bad situation immediately, which happened far too often with Garrett Bradbury when he was a Viking. And I think Ryan Kelly really shuts the quick wins down. So I'm really happy with that from him, from a pass protection perspective, even if that's not like necessarily a glowing review, right? But in the run game, I think he's still a high quality center. He's not going to have the reach potential that a Garrett Bradbury necessarily did, but he still does reach players on a consistent basis, including 2 eyes. And it's kind of an interesting question to talk about, right? Because a lot of times in the blocking scheme, you have a certain set of rules for who you're supposed to block, but it changes based on how the defense approaches your blocking scheme, right? So if the defense is slanting to the opposite direction of which way you're running, let's say you're running outside zone to the right, and the defense is slanting to the left, you may end up blocking a 3 technique and quote unquote reaching a 3 technique who is slanting into the A gap, right? Because you're bursting to the right on the snap, he's bursting to your left on the snap, and you're able to go past him, turn him, and block him out of the play because you overran it because he was going the wrong direction, right, with his first step. I feel like a lot of good reach blocks that might get praised or put out there kind of fall into that category, right? Where the offensive player was really helped out by the first step that the defensive player took, or just the strategy the defensive line was employing, right? So I try to isolate situations where that's not necessarily what's happening. And I thought he did a good job of reaching 2 eyes, which is a player on the inside shoulder of the guard, right? So it's not necessarily the furthest block in the world, but it is significantly like a yard or 2 further to get out and block than it would be to block a 1 technique, right? Somebody who's on your shoulder, which still requires initial burst to get past them and turn them around and knock them out of the play as a zone blocker. So I thought he was adequate in that regard. And I thought he also did a really good job with his body positioning in the run game to help create holes, right? And that's kind of what I was talking about where, okay, you need to get across the face of this 2 eye and you need to turn your body around kind of perpendicular to the line of scrimmage and push him backwards in that direction to prevent him from being able to make a play on the ball. And he was consistently able to do that, I thought, in the run game. As I mentioned on the combo blocks with Will Fries, I thought he had pretty good power in those situations. And I also thought, like with Fries, he was a good mover on screens who could get down to the second level. I also thought that if I go back to the double teams for a quick second, that he, once again, was able to help block whichever defender he was comboing with, whether that was with Quentin Nelson, his left guard, or Will Fries, and then come off of that block and get up to the second level. There were a couple of examples of him doing it to safeties. There was one really good one where at the snap, and I believe the defender was like a 3 technique, and I think it was Kenny Clark, who was on the outside shoulder of Quentin Nelson, and Kelly's helping block to the right. So he goes and blocks Nelson, or he goes and puts a hand into Kenny Clark's side, right? That's what you're supposed to do on a double team. Nelson had pretty much had it handled, but you give help before going up to the second level. It knocks Kenny Clark to the ground, and then he gets up to the second level, lays a hit on Javon Bullard, who's a safety coming down a little bit from depth, to try to make the play, knocks Bullard back a step into another Packers player. Bullard falls on the ground, right? So Kelly got 2 knockdowns basically in one play. It was a lot of fun. There was another play where, he was just a more typical double team block up to the second level. He squared up the safety right away and made a really proficient block, helped spring a run. So, really good job on double teams, getting movement on defenders, getting up to the second level, and making those blocks. The Colts ran a lot more gap scheme than what the Vikings did, so it'll be interesting to see if the Vikings kind of want to shift to a little bit more gap scheme. Now, I wouldn't expect them to necessarily start pulling people everywhere, but, more duo, kind of following in the Rams' footsteps and their own footsteps from last year. So again, that's kind of the scouting report on Ryan Kelly, right? Like, I think he's an adequate mover, or even a pretty good mover for a center in the run game. If he's not like the super elite flashes that Garrett Bradbury might have had, he's got good power. He works really well in tandem with other linemen, including the lineman who's coming to the Vikings with him. So I think that's a really big plus and something that's good for the team to have. As a pass protector, I think that the most important key is that he loses slowly. You don't have quick losses from him, and I think that's a really, really big boon for the Vikings, especially compared to what they've seen in recent years from a pass protection perspective. So next we'll get into Jonathan Allen, obviously longtime Washington player, right? Former first-round pick out of Alabama. Ryan Kelly, also out of Alabama, former first-round pick. A lot of former high-level Alabama players still in the NFL. Not really all that surprising. But he obviously the Vikings have signed to bolster their interior defensive line. They also added Javon Hargrave. So I'll be kind of comparing and contrasting those two players a little bit as I go along here, but we'll start out with Allen, right? So he plays, and Javon Hargrave, honestly, mostly played on the right side of the defensive line. I think that was just kind of the decision that the defensive play callers made on those teams. I don't think there's anything that really prevents them from playing over on the other side. And Hargrave, only played 3 games this year. Allen played something like 8 or 9, but he was injured early on in the season with a hamstring injury, I want to say, and Javon Hargrave was the triceps injury. Allen came back for the playoff run, so I got to watch him against both Tampa and the Lions in the playoffs. Like I said, in Dan Quinn's scheme, mostly plays to the right side, but he plays nose, including 0 and 1 tech, 3 technique, 4 eye right on the inside shoulder of the tackle. So he's kind of playing inside and out on that line. Which is, a good thing. Just schematically, the variety is good because the Vikings use a lot of variety in terms of how they present their fronts, right? He's definitely going to be asked to be a 4 eye, or a 5 technique up over the tackle, but he's also going to be asked to be inside and outside of the guard in a 3 tech or a 2 eye, and maybe, with depending on defensive line shifts and that sort of thing, up over the center as a 1 technique or 0 technique, depending on where Harrison Phillips lines up. With the Washington defense, there were a lot of stunts where he's the crasher outside, and those were kind of useless reps for him. He did have a really nice pressure. In the Bucs game, I think, against Tristan Wirfs, or maybe it was against Taylor Decker. I think it was against Taylor Decker in the Lions game, where he does a nice swim move getting to the outside against Graham Glasgow, and then immediately turns with a swim to the other side and beats Taylor Decker inside to get a pressure on Jared Goff. And that leads me to kind of my first thing, is that he's got really good and active hands as a defender. Like, he's constantly using his hands to get a better position on his opponent. Whether that's with like a swim move, some sort of rip, or like double swipe or whatever. Like, he's constantly trying to dismiss his opponent's hands, be able to keep himself clean as a defender and work upfield, as a pass rusher, but also in the run game in terms of his ability to hold up initially and then dismiss and shed the opponent's block to try to get in on the play, especially on a one-on-one situation. Um, so the the thing that kind of stood out to me as a pass rusher in terms of what he wants to do is he wants to initially shock you with his hands, right? He wants to get his hands on you in the first step and then try to disengage and swim through you or kind of pull through you and get you to the wrong side and get to the quarterback that way, right? So he had a really nice rep, and it was actually a touchdown for the Lions, but he got a pressure. He just wasn't quite. Goff was able to get the ball out before he got the sack against Graham Glasgow, where he does exactly that, right? He gets his hands up into the shoulder. He it's kind of like a snatch and trap from an offensive lineman, right? Where he gets his hands up into the shoulder pads. He pulls with his inside hand down. It's not holding. It doesn't get called like that. And then swims with his other arm over as he attacks kind of one edge of the defender. And I would say, and this was Glasgow's outside shoulder. And I would say that's typically what he does as a blocker is attack the outside shoulder or as a pass rusher is attack the outside shoulder and try to win that way. And I think he's pretty proficient at it. Like I said, I think he's got good hands to win in those situations. In terms of quickness off the ball, I did see a couple refs where he was crossing guys' faces and winning that way, kind of getting inside positioning, rushing upfield and able to get to the quarterback. But what I also saw were a number of reps, and it could be the field, but it makes me a little bit concerned, where it was kind of slipping, or he wasn't able to turn the corner in the way that he wanted, or he, slipped or was trying to turn the corner and slipped and fell down, right? So he ended up on the ground kind of pretty often, which I don't love from a defensive player, but it also was a situation where he was still coming back from injury. So I wouldn't be shocked if he was still missing a little bit of athleticism as he was rehabbing. In the run game, I think from a negative perspective, he can play a little high at times, and that gets him moved, pushed back a couple yards off the ball. It happened on double teams, that sort of thing. Or he can get knocked out of position. Like I was talking about, Ryan Kelly has really good positioning where he walls the defender off from the play. I saw that happen to him a couple times, especially against a guy like Tristan Wirfs in the game. And I think the reason he was able to get moved was because he plays high. But what I also saw was the ability for him to come back and win with leverage. There was this really impressive rep against the Lions where Glasgow gets an initial leverage advantage on him. He knocks him back a step and then really starts to try to drive his feet to push Allen backwards in the way I was talking about with Will Fries earlier, where he drove Montez Sweat, back 10 yards into the end zone. And it was a really good rep for Fries and embarrassing rep for Sweat, right? But what Jonathan Allen was able to do is stick his foot in the ground, reset his pads, reset his hands, get his hands underneath, and actually turn around and win the rep against Glasgow. And kind of stalemate Glasgow and stall him in his place. So I was really impressed by that leverage win and the tools to get the leverage back once he had initially lost it. And I criticized, I guess I started this out with criticizing his pad level at cases and saying he can get driven back. But while it happened to him, I wouldn't say it was a consistent feature of his run defense. Generally, I thought he was really good in run defense to be able to, hold the ground at the point of attack, not get driven backwards, and that recovery ability is part of that. But really, most of the time he was just in good position and wasn't able to be pushed backwards because he has the natural strength to stalemate offensive linemen and prevent them from, knocking him multiple yards off the ball. Another rep against Glasgow that springs to mind is one where Jahmyr Gibbs was running outside zone to the right, and he, Allen was able to work with him on the outside zone block, right? So you have to have the athleticism to get over to the intended gap, and then he was able to keep Glasgow on the same track. So if you look the other defensive tackle, I think Javon Newton, has gotten knocked a couple of yards into the defense, right? So Allen actually kind of runs past Javon Newton running to the left and, has Glasgow far back enough that it pushes Jahmyr Gibbs' path out wider than he wanted it to, and Dante Fowler from the backside was able to come in and make the tackle because Jonathan Allen was able to string the run out. And I think there are multiple reps where you see Allen string the run out wide and, force the running back into a situation where he's not able to get any yardage or he's tackled for minimal yardage because he had to go around his blocker that Allen was kind of preventing from, creating a running lane on the play, trying to figure out a way how to navigate saying that. And I think I kind of nailed it a little bit. Also with Allen, I think I started this a little bit, but I think he has the ability to, not only hold up to blocks, but use his hands to disengage from defenders in the blocking game, which allows him to stack, shed, and actually get in on tackles, get towards the ball carrier and make an impact on the play. I think that's big. There's some snap quickness. There was a rep against the Bucs, and it was actually a really important rep. So, the Washington Bucs game came down to Washington kicking a game-winning field goal at the end, but on the drive before that, Tampa had kicked a field goal to tie the game, and Tampa had a 3rd and 1 where they were, where they ran the ball, ended up losing 2 yards on the run because Jonathan Allen lined up over the center, shocks the center with his pads, disengages, gets into the backfield, knocks the running back a couple yards, and it's tackle for a loss of 2. And instead of maybe going for it on a 4th and 1 situation and, trying to score a touchdown to win the game, where now Washington would need to, because they're down 4, go back down to the field and score a touchdown to respond. They kick a field goal. It's a tie game. Washington can bleed out the clock and win the game on a game-ending field goal. So, I thought that was just a really impressive play, especially in a critical moment. So really clutch player, naturally strong player, I would say. Maybe not the high-level athleticism that leads to being like an elite pass rusher from the interior, but he's got really good hand usage, really good natural power, or natural strength, and the ability to use that to convert that to some pass rush production, right? And the bar is pretty low for the Vikings because they didn't really have anybody who could create as a pass rusher last year as an interior defensive lineman. Jonathan Allen is definitely better than anybody the Vikings had at doing that. So I think it's a pretty big win. And there were a couple nice effort plays that I saw as well, just putting up some odds and ends here. And then there's one zone drop, and he'll probably be asked to zone drop, in the Viking system, where Allen did a really good job following the quarterback's eyes, got underneath the curl route that was being run by Jamison Williams of all people. Now, it did kind of stumble at the end of it after the throw, right? So the athleticism, a little bit questionable overall, but good awareness on that play, I think, is the key. So with the Vikings, I really would see him playing the Jonathan Bullard role, right? Where he's basically a similar version, similar to Jonathan Bullard as a run defender, where I think he's got the strength to stand up individual offensive lineman. He's really good at shedding blocks and kind of getting in on plays. He can have the power to drive guys back multiple yards into the backfield, which we saw significant flashes from Bullard on in the system. But I think he also has more pass rush juice critically, right? So that's why you pay this guy, $15 million a year, or what the Vikings are playing him, because he's a good, strong player who can provide quality run defense, but also still has pretty significant pass rush juice, right? I wouldn't say it's to the level of Javon Hargrave, who I think is really explosive as a pass rusher. And that's even looking at 2023 tape still. Or sorry, not 2023, 2024 tape for Hargrave still. But I think Allen's going to be a more consistent down-to-down player for you, which I value a little bit more highly from a full profile perspective But I can see his specific role in the Vikings defense translating very well. So with a little bit of talk of Javon Hargrave over there, let me go over to talking about him. So he lines up on the left side of the offensive line as well. So, the right side from the defensive perspective, from 1-tech to 3 technique primarily. For the 49ers, they had some overload fronts and stuff where on rush downs, he was maybe in a little bit of a different position, but I would say typically that's the location where he's going to line up. And when you watch his pass rush, it absolutely jumps off the tape how explosive this guy is. He gets into opponents' faces. He's able to use quickness to get across their face, get upfield like instantaneously, and get pressures on the quarterback very quickly. And I still saw that in 2024 before he was sidelined with the injury. So I watched all 3 of his games in 2024. I also watched a cut up, and NFL Pro does a great job of some of this stuff of all of his pressures from 2023, just to get an idea of who he was as a rusher, right? And he didn't do much in terms of pressure from the Vikings game, although he did a few, but he had like 6 pressures against the Rams the week after that before he was out for the rest of the season with injury. So I really think he was on a high level as a pass rusher from 2024, and then you see like a super high rate of pressure. The next gen stats stuff had him with like 60 pressures. I would quibble with some of the reps that got included in that cut up, but it was still like a high level of pressure in 2023. So hopefully he can be able to get back to that form, and the explosion is real, right? He's a shorter player. He measured in under 6'1.5", 6'1 3/8 at the combine way back when, 2016 time frame, but was 309 pounds at that point, right? So like stocky, powerful player with an explosive lower half. He gets up under offensive linemen's pads and drives them back to the quarterback. Now, interestingly, I talked about the hands with John Allen and his ability to win, and his primary mode of winning is great hand usage to be able to dismiss defenders and that sort of thing. That's not Hargrave's game. He wants to stick his hands in your chest and drive you back with his leg drive, and he's really good at it. So I can't really blame him for it. Like I talked about, he also has the explosion to get outside, and this showed up in his sack of Matthew Stafford from last year, where he is lined up. I believe it was as a 3 technique, but it might have been a 2-eye. He crosses the guard's face immediately to the outside, has the bend to turn the corner and get to Stafford to make the sack. He uses his hands well to get his opponent's hands off of them, but it's not like a dramatic move or anything, right? It's just he was so quick off the snap. His opponent tried to throw a punch, and he just dismissed it and got to the quarterback instantly for a sack. Stafford had no shot. This is a type of pressure where the quarterback can't even get away or try to get a throw off. It was that quick. There was another play against the Vikings where he was so fast off the ball that he almost sacked Sam Darnold before he was able to do a play fake on a handoff. He didn't end up getting the sack in this case, although I believe it did turn into a sack. It was one where Darnold tried to run away and throw the ball away, and the ball hit the ground, or his knee hit the ground before the ball got out, or it was intentional grounding or some sort of thing on a rollout. But Javon Hargrave absolutely blew the play up by getting off the snap so quickly. This burst also really helps him on stunts, right? Where he's a crasher on stunts. He can get past the first player, hit the inside shoulder of the second player if he's trying to go to the outside, for example, on, like a text stunt, right? I'm losing the name in the Flores system, but a tackle and exchange stunt where he, your aiming point as a defensive tackle is the inside shoulder of the tackle. In Hargrave's case, it would be the left tackle. and then you kind of try to turn up field and get to the quarterback. He's so fast across the guard's face that the guard can't really get hands on him. So it puts the tackle in a really bad position, right? Because on a stunt like that, you want the guard to push the player out towards the tackle to give the tackle a little bit more surface area to work with. He's so quick that he's able to get inside, and he gets a number of pressures that way. He's also got the flexibility as a looper to go around and the explosion to cross the face of like the center if you have a stump between both tackles, or if it's like you have, the 49ers did a lot of overload fronts where they put 3 defenders to the one side of the center, and they'd have, the inside tackle who's like a slanted one technique go to the guard, and he's got to go run around, and Hargrave has to go run around the center, and he was really effective at that too. So I mean, just a powerful player, a quick player, a high level pass rusher that I got more excited about his role on the Vikings as I watched this than I was honestly expecting to, just from my understanding of his profile. The thing is, I haven't talked about the run game part of his profile yet, right? So I really see Hargrave as a Jihad Ward replacement, and not just a Jihad Ward replacement, but I think I would want to give all 400, 450, whatever it is, of Jihad Ward snaps last year to Javon Hargrave. Just put him in that position to wreck stuff as an interior pass rusher on third downs and long distance situations. I would put him in rotationally in a Jerry Tillery role. Jerry Tillery, who also got 400 something snaps last year, right? But I wouldn't have him full-time play that Tillery role. I would have him full-time play the Ward role and then moonlight in the Tillery role for a total of like 600 snaps to try to keep him fresh, because I really don't love his run defense. I mean, it's comical sometimes when you watch it, just the amount of push that opponents are able to get on double teams against him. The Vikings, there's like a highlight reel of Garrett Bradbury and Blake Brandel doing this. There's like a highlight reel of the Rams guys doing this. There's like a highlight reel of the Cardinals players doing this. It's crazy. It was 10 to 15 times in 3 games against double teams where he's getting pushed 3, 4, 5 plus yards off the ball. So his low positioning with good leverage, he's got low positioning with good leverage as a bull rusher, right? He's able to get his pads low, get his arms up into the chest of the defender, and just push backwards. That gets reversed on him when he goes the other way because he doesn't have a good, and it's defensive line, offensive line. There's a lot of corollaries there, right? As a bull rusher, you want to get up in your opponent's chest and you want to have good leg drive, push them back into the pocket. And he's really powerful doing that. Will Fries, as a run blocker, wants to get up into his opponent's chest, have good leg drive to push the opponent backwards. You want to anchor as an offensive lineman where you're able to kind of have probably a bit of a wide stance or a hop stance and push yourself or stop your opponent's momentum. You want to do a similar thing where you create a difficult angle as a defensive tackle to stop a double team block, have 2 guys at once on you, and sometimes that involves dropping down to a knee, even kind of twisting your upper half or minimizing the contact surface that your opponent has on you to actually get leverage and push you. And Hargrave does not do a good job of stopping that. So part of it's a technical thing, but I just don't think it's something he's necessarily going to get better at, right? As someone who's like entering probably his 10th year in the NFL. So it's just something you're going to have to live with the Vikings, which is why I would be hesitant to put him on as a defensive tackle in run defense situations. Fortunately for the Vikings, they not only have Jonathan Allen, they have Harrison Phillips, who's a fantastic run defender. They have a plethora of young guys, including Taki Taimani and Jalen Redmond, who I really thought showed good things as run defenders last year. Levi Drake Rodriguez, I'm not sure about her as a run defender. I like his pass rush potential a little bit more than I like his run defense potential, but he could be very interesting as a rotational player last year, especially considering he was a raw player coming out of a small school. It'll be interesting to see what he's been able to learn over the course of the past year, but I think the Vikings have done really well for themselves to have enough players in that defensive tackle room where they don't need Javon Hargrave to take on a role where he's asked to do a significant amount of run defense, and he can do what he's still excellent at, which is get after opposing quarterbacks. I don't want to end on the negatives, although one more, and I didn't mention this, but I kind of thought it was implied with the way I talked about his pass rush. My note here says he doesn't really seem to have the secondary moves or tool bag to disengage from linemen if he doesn't win in the first step or bull rush through a player, right? So what I mean by that is, I talked about his powerful bull rush to get back towards the quarterback. I talked about his first step quickness and his ability to dismiss his opponent's hands. When he gets blocked and when opponents get the better of him, it's when they're able to anchor and stop his bull rush, and then he doesn't really have a bag of moves like I talked about with Jonathan Allen, right, where he has that initial shock and then a swim move over his opponent with the ability to pull it down, or he's got great hand fighting to dismiss his opponent's hands multiple times and kind of win the edge that way and maybe rip through and kind of come underneath his opponent, right? Hargrave doesn't really show that all that often. It's either he wins within the first step or the first move, or he gets shut down. But he's so explosive and so powerful that it's not really that big of an issue, right? And he still generates a ton of pressure. So it's not like this is a major concern. It's just this is who this guy is as a player. But to finish it on a high note, one thing I did notice, and now, I should go back to the run defense a little bit because I talked about how bad he was against double teams. He did show the ability to disengage, at least as I talked about with Allen a little bit, against single blocks, right? And against the zone type of blocks where the opponents are moving laterally. He got knocked back a little bit more. He was the type of player who's taking a step or two back, falling back a yard or two into the I keep wanting to say the backfield, but it's the opposite. He's falling back a yard or two, getting pushed downfield past the line of scrimmage, but he's able to disengage and kind of get in on plays because he does have the ability to get that initial disengagement and kind of stack and shed, on defense. But what I wanted to finish with is that he does seem to be like a really high IQ player from what I can tell. His screen recognition felt phenomenal to me. He was able to basically see the screens before they even happened or before they set up. And like a lot of times, I think player screen recognition comes from how their opposing player directly across from them is blocking them, right? Like if you see a tackle give up and let you run by, you'll end up turning around and going after the screen. But I thought Hargrave saw screens even before that. There was a play against the Vikings where he's engaged with Blake Brandel, and as soon as he engages with Blake Brandel, he starts running to the right? So it's a typical rush. He's trying to set it up kind of like a bull rush, and his helmet is to Brandel's inside shoulder, right? So he starts off as like a 2-eye, or he's trying to rush the inside shoulder of Blake Brandel. And as soon as he makes contact, he's moving laterally to his right because I think he saw the way Aaron Jones was setting up, where Aaron Jones kind of slow played it with a couple steps, made it look like he was pass protecting a little bit, and then ran out to the right, which is, that's how running backs set up screens. But I think he just recognized the movements from Aaron Jones and was able to get out there and get out towards the edge and make a tackle on the play. On that play, it was notable Garrett Bradbury, where you have two, typically with a slide like that, you'd have help from the inside shoulder. So maybe he was kind of expecting on a normal pass blocking rep for Bradbury to go up and give him a hand, or give Brandel a hand, right? And put a hand on Hargrave to help him with that. And that was part of the recognition. Either way, recognizing that from either perspective, whether it's like, I'm not getting blocked by Bradbury, which means something up, even though Brandel's right in front of me and he is actually putting legit effort into the block. Like Brandel never tried to disengage and get out in front as part of a screen, as you might expect somebody to recognize the screen from, right? He just recognized it, I think, from the movements from Aaron Jones and the movements from Garrett Bradbury, which I thought was really, really impressive. And I saw that multiple times on tape where he was out in front of things on a screen. and able to make the plays. So I was really happy to see that from Javon Hargrave, and I think it is very much a plus in his favor. So, if I want to take a step back and look at John Allen and Javon Hargrave as players, right? I think John Allen is far and away, to me, the better run defender, who I want to be in the game on early downs, kind of as a reliable, steady presence alongside Harrison Phillips. You can put Javon Hargrave in the Jerry Tillery role, but I don't want that to be kind of his full-time role, and then he moonlights as a pass rusher. What I want instead is, in more lighter defensive tackle situations, I would want to put both John Allen and Javon Hargrave on the field, take Harrison Phillips off, right, and use Harrison Phillips for the heavy run situations. Now, obviously, there's going to be some sort of rotation, so I would expect there to be situations where you have all three of Phillips, Hargrave, and Allen on the field. I would expect there to be situations where I would want Allen, Phillips, and a guy like Jalen Redmond, which happened quite a bit, when Redmond kind of took over for Jerry Tillery towards the end of the year last year. But I would expect there to be situations where I want John Allen and Harrison Phillips to be on the field. Maybe I want to play in a lighter personnel, but it's more of a run focused down, right? So I don't want to have three interior defensive linemen on the field. I only want to have two. And then in a situation where you only want to have two interior defensive linemen on the field, but you want to have a more pass rush focused situation, I would put Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave on the field at the same time. And then if I flip it over to my, the Vikings ran 400 snaps basically last year, where they technically had 4 quote unquote edge rushers on the field, right? That whether you want to call it a NASCAR package or whatever, with Jonathan Grenard, typically Andrew Van Ginkel, and sometimes it was either Pat Jones or Dallas Turner, right? And then Jihad Ward is your interior rusher. That's Javon Hargrave's role. That's Javon Hargrave's primary responsibility, is to be an interior rusher in those situations. So it'll no longer be a quote-unquote NASCAR package because Javon Hargrave gets listed as a interior defensive lineman or a defensive tackle, whereas Jihad Ward gets listed as an edge rusher or outside linebacker. But it'll be the same spirit kind of the play, as this is our guy to get after the quarterback, to play really, really well on stunts. So that's kind of where I see those two roles playing out, and I'm pretty excited about that for both players. So the next player on my list is Isaiah Rodgers, who I would say I was pleasantly surprised by, honestly, from watching him. I kind of question the just on face, right? This is a player who played for the Indianapolis Colts, was a starter, but ended up getting suspended and only played, the majority of 3 games for the Eagles, or maybe it was like 2 full regular season games and 1 full postseason game, with a couple half games sprinkled in there where he had 36 snaps, right? So, not a lot of, he wasn't a full-time starter, right? And the Vikings are signing him to $5 million a year. That's a pretty significant corner contract. It's not like quality starter level, but it's a decent amount of money, right? And not somebody who you necessarily want to be riding the bench. And it's pretty clear from like how Kevin O'Connell had spoken pretty glowingly about him, that they see this guy as their starter, as a starting corner for them. So, based on that, and the history, I was a little bit questioning, not because I think, the gambling suspension is like a major concern, but it's like he hasn't necessarily proven that he's a quality starting corner. The Vikings don't really have anybody else on the roster who is proven to be a starting quality corner, besides Byron Murphy. So it's a pretty significant need if an Isaiah Rodgers weren't to turn out to be good, and Mekhi Blackmon turns out that he's not good. Like, now you're down 2 corners in a really rough situation, like you were in 2023 when your cornerback room was really bad. And that became a huge problem for the defense down the stretch. But I think that Isaiah Rodgers, after watching him, can be a good starter in the NFL. I don't think he's necessarily going to be a world-beating player, and I'll get into some of that, but I think he can be a quality starter in the NFL. And I think that's really important. And I think the Vikings probably got good value on the $5 million a year in terms of the contract that he got. So with the Eagles, he was primarily the right cornerback, and he was in a lot for Darius Slay getting hurt, right? Where Slay's an older player, he dealt with a bunch of injuries throughout the course of the season, so he was replacing him. There were some reps where it was replacing Quinyon Mitchell, who was their left cornerback, right? They played sides rather than really traveling, and there were some reps where both of those guys were in the field, but they were playing dime corner or something, and this happened against the one Washington game in the playoffs, right? In the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl against Kansas City. He played a couple dime reps in the slot, and then he also played left cornerback against the Rams, where all the other reps were primarily right cornerback. There might have been one or two snaps inside. And the first thing that jumps off the tape for me with Isaiah Rodgers was that he has easy long speed. You look at him covering vertical routes, he is not bothered at all. He's willing to wait to turn with the receiver, to run upfield, and he fully trusts in his ability and has the ability to keep up with them vertically. Like, he trusts it, and he absolutely has the ability to do that. I think his movement skills are really, really good. He's got quick transitions from his hips to move inside or outside. He can quickly transition, drop his hips, and drive forward to burst after breaks. The first thing that popped up, and I watched every single one of his reps from the Eagles last year. It was like 401 plays, including the playoff stuff. And I think it was in the Bucs game against, well, the very first rep in the Bucs game I'll get to in a second was against Mike Evans, but it was against, one of their secondary receivers. Maybe it was McMillan or something. And it's a curl route, right? So he's playing off zone coverage. He has to take a step or two back towards the first down marker, and the receiver turns around, looks for the ball. Baker looks to throw the ball and then sees Rodgers driving on the ball, and he deters the throw because he's so explosive out of that break. I do believe he would have intercepted it, right, if the ball was thrown. So that really stood out to me. Again, his ability to stick with routes was impressive, and he's got natural confidence, as most corners do, right? So there was one rep against Jerry Jeudy where he literally told Jerry Jeudy how to line up, right? So he lined up across from him, was in press, pointed at Jeudy and was like, hey, you need to take a step back or you're going to get called for illegal formation, because he was covering up the tight end with how he was lined up. Jeudy takes a step back, and then the play begins, right? So it was kind of funny. I mean, I guess that's helping out your opponent, but it's just such a corner thing to do, right? To say you need to do this and then go absolutely put the clamps on Jeudy on the route, right? So he's in press coverage. Jeudy tries to release to the outside. This is where you see the easy speed for him to follow Jeudy up the field. And then Jeudy breaks down and goes to the outside. Again, easy, quick transition and flip to the hips to follow Jeudy outside, undercut a potential throw, anticipation throw on an out route, which anticipation throws weren't really happening from Deshaun Watson, but it's good to see. And then Jeudy turns it upfield as it's an out and up, right? And he's able to recover and get upfield and stay well in phase, pin Jeudy against the sideline on that route. I thought that was really impressive and probably the highest level example of his movement skills. There was a play against Mike Evans where he lined up, got in his face a little bit, was able to cover him on, a corner or out breaking route. It might have been an out route as well, where I thought just the movement skills were really good. With the movement skills being really good, the physicality for me was not there. So he's a very small player. He's listed at 5'10", 170, like from the Eagles. I forget what his measurements were from the combine, but it was something in the 5'9", 5'8" range, right? And then still that 170 pounds, right? Not a big guy, but he is an outside corner, and don't really see him being a slot player. And I'll kind of get to talking about that a little bit. But I thought he can get knocked off routes with physicality. So Amari Cooper did this on a couple routes against him where he's running a slant or something, and Cooper gets physical, puts a little shoulder into him and breaks wide open, knocks Rodgers a couple yards back off the ball, kind of gets open that way. So I thought he struggled with that a little bit. I thought he struggled as a player. And this is like, I'm trying not to overrate this because this is like exceedingly difficult. It's not even something that's super realistic to ask a corner to do. But for the Eagles scheme, right, their defensive coordinator is Vic Fangio. If you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, you're pretty familiar with the Fangio defense, which runs a lot of quarters, a lot of quarter half stuff. But Fangio also runs a lot more man coverage than the Vikings did in 2022, right? So I'm pretty happy with his ability as a man coverage player, his ability to stick to routes and that sort of thing. But basically his role is to be outside man coverage or outside quarters coverage, which can be man on demand, right? If your opposing receiver runs vertical for long enough, you have to play him in man coverage, or sometimes on the backside of quarters, you'll get locked into man coverage, depending on the play call or that sort of thing, right? So, there can be vertical routes where you're in quarters, which means you're supposed to stay outside and deep of the player. If they're in a cut split, you're supposed to stay with leverage that's outside of the player, kind of a zone defense, funnel things back inside. But then if they run far enough vertical, you're now responsible for covering the in-break of the route that they're running, right? So it's kind of a difficult situation to be put in as a defender. And like I said, almost everybody struggles with it. There are some rare guys who can catch up and like actually make the plays in these situations. But I would say that Rodgers is not one of them. I think he has great speed. I talked about his easy recovery speed, but like sometimes receivers can just outrun him, right? And it happened on a relatively consistent basis where he would be set up to the outside and unable to undercut an in-breaking route on like a dig or something like that. And I think part of it had to do with lack of anticipation of that kind of route concept. And maybe that's something where a lot of times in these situations, he's getting thrown into games, right? So he, I'm sure, is in game planning meetings and that sort of things, but he doesn't maybe have the prep that a guy who's a full-time starter might be, because he has to be prepared for kind of every single role as the fourth corner, right? As the fourth guy up, he kind of has to be able to play any of the roles that he might get asked to play on that day if somebody gets hurt, right? So maybe he doesn't have the specific prep that he would need to jump these kind of things, and he'll get better if he's a bona fide starter, right? And prepping for, let's say, one position every time, we're prepping to go against a specific receiver if the Vikings want him to travel or play some sort of matchups or that sort of thing. And it might be able to help him with this. But I did think he struggled to get back inside, or at least wasn't elite to actually undercut these plays and start making plays in the situations where he has bad leverage, right, at the snap, where the receiver has him beat based on leverage and they're able to make the in cut that they have. Now, again, that's a pretty nitpicky thing to say, but I thought it was worth bringing up. The other thing that, again, is relatively nitpicky, but it happens to him more often than I would like, is I think he can overcommit sometimes as a defender. Like, he can get sold by his opponent's routes, flip his hips the wrong way, and end up in bad positions. When he allowed receptions or targets, I think that's generally what happened. And I think he allowed receptions or targets a little bit more often than I would like. Again, I think he's an extremely sticky player. Generally, he's got great movement skills, is able to stick with things on the outside of routes and that sort of thing. And I had way more positive notes on these sorts of things than I had negative notes, but I think it's worth mentioning that it happened a little bit more often than I would like. And there are some situations where this is like really bad conditions, right? The divisional round against the Rams were really bad conditions for him that he had to play on. It's, snowing. It's like an ice rink out there. So he's doing what he can in a lot of these situations. So those are two negatives, right? But I think what I want to be clear about is they're minor negatives in the grand scheme of things to me, right? Overall, I think he is a plus player, especially as an athlete, with his ability to mirror and cover opponents. it's just like corners aren't going to be perfect. And unless you get like really, really high level guys, like you're not going to fully shut down guys. You are going to lose in these ways sometimes. And this is what happens to him. I think the physicality is a little bit more of a question. With Rodgers particularly, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But so I talked about the coverage phase of things. I did not talk about once the ball actually gets thrown. I think he has pretty good ball skills. There was a really impressive rep again against the Bengals where he's going against one-on-one against Jamar Chase on a vertical route, right? And he's got safety help coming over the top, or maybe it was third help from CJ Gardner-Johnson, but Gardner-Johnson isn't in on the play, right? Joe Burrow throws up a deep ball on a 9 route, on a fade route to Jamar Chase. Who's one of the most explosive players in the league, right? One of the fastest. He's probably not like the fastest speed burner, but he's a really fast receiver who's a great, great wide receiver, able to win vertical, absolutely. Rodgers keeps vertical with him easily, is able to find the ball and bat it to CJ Gardner-Johnson, directly to CJ Gardner-Johnson for the interception. It was a really very impressive play. And then you see other instances, I think, of good ball skills. There are ones where he's able to knock the ball down, kind of undercut routes, and make plays on the ball. But there was one play against the Rams in that divisional game where I thought he displayed really good ball skills. I thought he displayed really good on the route up until like literally the catch point. It's not that the ball skills were bad, because he got his hands on the football and I think he thought he was going to have an interception underneath Denard Robinson, and Denard Robinson ripped the ball, not Denard Robinson, the former Michigan quarterback who went to the Jags. I'm blanking on the name of the Rams wide receiver, but he's the one who caught the 2 touchdowns against the Vikings. Robinson, started his career out with the Chiefs, and now I'm losing it. But Robinson, ripped the ball away from him on a vertical route that I thought should have been an interception. So I think the physicality shows up a little bit there. And then Cooper Kupp had a catch against him where, again, I thought the physicality showed up and he wasn't able to rip the ball out from Cooper Kupp, or the lack of physicality in those situations. So physicality, big negative for me. I will say in the tackling game up against screens, he's willing to come up and lay a hit on people. There was a play against Chris Godwin where he was covering Mike Evans, and this was like the first rep I watched of him, which I thought was really awesome. He covers Mike Evans, kind of locks him down, prevents a throw. The throw goes to Chris Godwin. He immediately pivots and lays a shoulder into Chris Godwin and kind of gets a big hit. So he's willing to, lay a shoulder into guys, make big hits, but he's not a great tackler. I posted a rep of him getting dragged across the field by Puka Nacua, getting dragged like 20 yards downfield, basically, because, he just doesn't have the stopping power to tackle a guy like that. There are way more than I would like, let me say, missed tackles where he wraps a guy up and just isn't able to bring him to the ground on tape. If he has to face up against a blocker, he immediately loses ground. He does not like to work into contact or kind of violently take on blocks in that situation. He'd want to work around blocks and try to make hits on the players who are the ball carrier. So he's not afraid to like hit the ball carrier, but he is afraid to like take on blocks, and it is kind of going to lose and shy away from contact in those situations. So it's kind of an up and down profile, right? He's got solid press skills. He can go up, press, man coverage, mirror, do whatever you want from a man coverage perspective. He's not perfect, I would say, from the mental side of the game. Even if he's technically very proficient in the way he moves and things like that. And then he's got good instincts, trying to go for the ball and finding the ball and being able to play in phase and things like that with his ball skills. But he just lacks the physicality overall in his game that I think would make him an elite player, right? Or like a Pro Bowl caliber corner, right? So like from a movement skills perspective, from this guy's physical abilities to play corner, or his athleticism to play corner, I don't have any concerns about Isaiah Rodgers, and I think he's a good player. From a physicality perspective, I think that's where he struggles and might set him back from reaching his peak. So hopefully the Vikings can get a little bit more physicality out of him than he was willing to play with the with the Eagles, right? But we'll kind of see how this plays out. So I think he's a good corner, but I also think that the Vikings still have a need for like a tall, long outside corner who's able to play with physicality, kind of replacing what they had for Stephon Gilmore last year. So maybe they think Mekhi Blackman is going to become that player, but I wouldn't bet on it, right? So I think Rodgers can absolutely be one of your 3 starters, but I kind of want him to be planned to be the worst of the 3 starters at this point in his career. So I'm relatively happy and feel sated that like he is going to be a good player for the Vikings, but I also want the Vikings to strive for more at the position is what I would say. I am going to finish it off here with the only player that the Vikings traded for in Jordan Mason. So I watched Mason's full game against the Vikings. Obviously they played in week 2. And then I watched, all of his runs and then all of his targets. He wasn't really doing a lot in terms of what he was asked to do from route running in the Vikings game. So I figured he probably wasn't asked to do a ton of route running. What I thought was interesting is he also wasn't asked to pass protect a ton in the Vikings game. Like, especially early on, he basically had no pass protection reps. And then when he was pass protecting, and I'll get into that a little bit better, but I thought he was a pretty good pass protector. So it surprised me a little bit. And it turned out he only had 24 pass pro reps on the season, and 8 of them came in the Vikings game. So I was shocked with how little he was asked to pass protect in the Vikings game. And then it turned out that was like the most pass pro reps he had in a single game this past year. So it was kind of an interesting combo, especially since I thought he was pretty good in pass protection. It was just kind of interesting. Obviously the Vikings had to trade for Jordan Mason. He was a restricted free agent for the 49ers. So they gave the 49ers like a 6th round pick and some sort of pick swap or something. I don't really remember what the exact details are. Maybe it was their 5th round pick swap and then a 2026 6th round pick. So it was a 5th round pick for their 6th or 7th this year, and then the 6th next year that they just kind of got for free. But, obviously Mason was like a fantasy sensation this season in the absence of Christian McCaffrey, and then he got hurt himself, so it wasn't really all that impactful down for you for the playoff stretch or anything like that if you're a fantasy football manager with him. But just from watching the tape, I thought he was a really, really reliable zone runner. And I think his superpower is his ability to move through traffic. So kind of the weaving or the curvilinear movement that Dalvin Cook did, that Aaron Jones is really good at. I think Jordan Mason also has that. You don't see violent moves from him. I mean, he'll stick his foot in the ground and cut up field as you're supposed to do and in zone runs, but he will then weave and take small changes of direction to get the best angles possible on his runs and kind of maximize yardage in that way. And I thought that was really impressive and really reliable. So like, and I thought he paced his runs really well, right? He knew when the holes were going to open. He could see the holes open before they happened and figure out how to get through them effectively, kind of at speed and using the speed that he has. I think he has enough burst, good burst to hit the edge. Like he can get to the edge, get around the corners on the edge of the defense or the defensive backs on the edge of the defense, turn up field. And he can win in the 5 to 10 yard range, kind of going up the middle of the field, get past linebackers, make safeties angles wrong a little bit. But he does run out of speed once he kind of gets into the secondary and would have to turn on the 3rd gear or 5th gear or 6th gear or whatever you want to call it, to get to the end zone to finish a long run, right? So he'll like get to the edge, get around the edge of the defense and start to accelerate upfield, and then get caught by a safety who's coming in from a wider angle, or maybe, there weren't really too many breakaway runs where he was like purely running down the field but get caught from behind. There was a run against the Patriots where like he outruns and he has the burst to outrun Jabril Peppers, who's coming downhill to the edge, and then Jabril Peppers is able to turn around and actually catch up to him. Now he had to cut back inside past a deeper safety who was kind of scraping over, but Jabril Peppers was actually able to turn around, accelerate, and catch up to him kind of at his top speed, right? Versus Jordan Mace's top speed, so he just ended up faster than him. There was a rep against the Vikings where Andrew Van Ginkel was able to catch him down from behind, and like you saw a good number of explosive runs or like nice runs from Jordan Mason where he had like over 20 runs. I think it was 23 runs out of 150, right? So it was like, what's that? Like, a good 15, not quite 20% of his runs were over 10 yards. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good rate. And he had 9 runs of over 20 yards. It's just he wasn't able to convert those runs of over 20 yards into long touchdown runs, right? Of the 50+ yard runs, something like that. He maxed out at 38 yards, I think was his longest run on the season. And none of those like very long runs were touchdowns. So you kind of see, he doesn't have the Saquon Barkley level of explosiveness and finishing, which is totally fine, especially for a back who's kind of your secondary back, might end up being your starter if Aaron Jones gets hurt or that sort of thing, right? The Vikings aren't paying him to be kind of an elite finisher at that. And I think everything else he does in the running game more than makes up for a slight deficiency there, right? And like I said, that's not to say he's a bad athlete, right? Alexander Mattison didn't work as the lead back for the Vikings because he didn't have the burst to hit those holes. Jordan Mason has the burst. He can hit the holes. He can get there before defenders. He just maybe doesn't have the extra gear on the long speed to actually finish that. And so he's got great zone vision. He understands where to pick his holes. He understands how to find things as they develop throughout the play and weave through the second level of the defense to kind of maximize his yardage on the run. He also has very good contact balance and runs with good pad level and power, right? You see defenders regularly bounce off of him, if they hit his hip or something like that, and he's able to keep going like nothing bothers him. Arm tackles really don't bother him. There are so many defenders who fell off on a wrap. And then when he has to make contact with the defender, he lowers his pads and he gets good drive. I put up a compilation, and this wasn't even, this was before he was a Viking. This was after the week 2 game, of just how impressed with how Jordan Mason finished runs I was, right? How impressed I was with his ability to finish runs and kind of drive for extra yardage after contact. Like, I thought it was something that really stood out to me as somebody who was watching an opponent play in that situation, not kind of scouting for positives of Jordan Mason, just like really respecting what he was able to do to the Vikings defense on a very successful game from him, right? And not a lot of people had successful games rushing the football against the Vikings. Jordan Mason did. It was like him and Kyron, I think, maybe had a successful game, and Jahmyr Gibbs' both games were great, but the Vikings have a Jahmyr Gibbs problem in terms of just their ability to defend against him specifically, I think, because of his burst and speed. To me, Mason was a really reliable read, and I went through each of these runs from the past years, and I actively decided to think about if he made a good decision or not, or if he, I stopped it kind of when he got the ball, as the play developed, and thought what I would do in the situation based on the leverages he was giving. And he had a handful of zone runs that I thought were mistakes. Like, out of 150 plays, that's a really, really positive rate, especially with how quickly things move. He saw the way holes open before they could. He doesn't bounce runs to the outside. And, because of his lack of burst, he's not going to be able to convert as many of those as a player like a Jahmyr Gibbs, right, who has that elite speed would be. So it's smart for him to not bounce run outside. He finds really small creases in certain situations where he's backed up against his own goal line, or, when he needs to get a couple yards, he'll be able to find those creases and find really small holes and weave his way through those holes, I think, really effectively. I talked about the decision making. I do think he's a significantly better zone runner than he is a gap runner. A lot of the, I'll say, quote unquote, bad decisions I thought were on gap runs where he has a lane to stick it up in the middle and he tries to bounce outside and ends up getting tackled by a corner for like no gain or something like that. And it could be the situation is like it's a duo run, and based on the read with the linebacker, you might be supposed to bounce it, right? So I could be a little bit aggressive to pan him in those plays, but they didn't result in successful plays, right? So that's kind of where I drew the line in terms of saying, I didn't think he made the right read in those plays. So I had, 5 to 6 plays over the course of 150 where I thought it was just flat out a bad decision. Like I thought he made the wrong choice. And then there were maybe, 6 to 10, like 15 total between bad decisions and like questionable decisions out of 153 carries. I think that's a really, really consistent positive run rate, right? That's like 135 of your 150 carries that you made the absolute right decision. And, you didn't necessarily maximize every single one of those, but you were consistently successful and you had good runs on the vast majority of those. So really pleased with Jordan Mason as a runner. And then as a pass catcher, right, I kind of mentioned he runs mostly check down routes. Like a lot of it's running between the guard and tackle. He probably has a bit of a pass protection responsibility, right? If somebody blitzes and then he just releases into the flat or releases over the ball, kind of to do that. I thought he had soft hands and the ability to transition upfield. Like he tries to catch the ball away from his frame. He doesn't let the ball into him. So I think that's a positive, but I don't think he's special in any way in terms of pass catcher or as a route runner. I did get to see like an angle route that he did like okay on. There was a wheel route which he actually won, and then Purdy wasn't able to make the right throw on, or I think he got his thrown, so he wasn't able to kind of reward that win on a wheel route. He did have one rep I saw where it was lined outside and right on a now return, which is kind of like a whip route. On that play, the linebacker was able to keep up with him, and it was a contested catch that Mason wasn't able to make, right? So he's not like he's got ridiculous hands and is able to make these sorts of contested catches as a running back or that sort of thing, which is why I would call him just like an average receiver. Someone who, you can throw a pass to, right? But he's not going to blow your mind. And he doesn't have the quick twitch in space. I kind of talked about that with his athletic ability and his cuts, right? Where he sticks his foot on the ground and can go upfield, but it's not the dynamic lateral movement that you'd see from like the jitterbug type of running backs, right? So, he's not a guy that you're really looking to get that kind of in-space play from, but it was interesting that when he was on the field, the 49ers would, put him out into routes rather than having him in pass protection. Now, I think that's because they preferred to have Kyle Juszczyk pass check, kind of like the pass protect, kind of like the Vikings have CJ Ham in the backfield in third down situations and that sort of thing. They just, really like Juszczyk as a pass blocker. They on third downs against the Vikings, there were a lot of situations where Mason wasn't in the game, and they'd have 5 wide, even with Juszczyk and Kittle being like the tight ends, and they give chip help to the tackles and that sort of thing, right? As opposed to Mason being in the backfield. But when I did see Jordan Mason block, I was really impressed. Like he shows really good technical skill to square up on the defenders he's blocking. He identified blitzers correctly in pretty much every case that I saw. He squared up against them, delivered a strong punch that knocked him back, and was tenacious. He was able to reset his hands after that initial punch, get his hands back on the defender, and I'm watching him block the Minnesota Vikings blitzing, right? Who are like absolutely the top level blitzers from the linebacker position in the NFL. From what Blake Cashman is able to do to what Ivan Pace is able to do. And Mason more than held his own against those guys, making the block, resetting his hands, and then driving Blake Cashman into the ground, like mirroring him and following him in pass protection. It happened to Ivan Pace as well, who he got knocked into the ground. The area I would say he struggled was when he was trying to cut block players as opposed to blocking them straight up. He missed Josh Metellus on a cut block, and I thought it was kind of a negative block. So I think he's a really good pass protector who's technically sound, especially when he stands up. He probably needs to work a little bit on the cut block side of things, but I have no qualms about leaving him in pass protection for the Vikings. So I was really happy to see that sort of thing. And overall, it leaves a strong profile, right? He's going to be a reliable zone runner for you. I think, I might be a little bit down on his gap running compared to his zone running, but I don't think he's going to be bad at that by any stretch. I think he's got solid burst for the NFL level, right? Where it's like more than adequate, maybe an above average level of him being able to hit the hole and actually get through it and get extra yardage. I think his movement skills through the hole are absolutely really impressive just from a smoothness perspective, right? And that's what I describe him as a smooth runner. So even if he lacks the top end speed that maybe an Aaron Jones has, right, and the home run hitting ability, he's going to consistently get you the good gains. And I think that's a really valuable thing to have on an offense, especially backing up somebody who can be a little bit more of a home run hitter than Aaron Jones, right? So this isn't a guy who's going to be an explosive, maybe candidate for the top back in the league, but I think he's going to be a really good, consistent running back because he offers just a really stable ability to run the ball. And I like that for a guy you're paying, roughly $5 million a year in the middle ranges of things. So really happy with the addition of Jordan Mason to the Vikings, really happy with the addition of all of these guys to the Vikings, right? And even if I brought up some negatives on a couple players, I think what the Vikings are going to be able to put them in position for is to play really well at what they do well, right? So Isaiah Rodgers keeping him in man coverage, having the flexibility to play zone, and kind of the crazy coverages the Vikings run. I think his playmaking instincts and his transitional quickness will really be positive there. I think the Vikings are going to have a clear role for Javon Hargrave in terms of who he is as a pass rusher and protect him from his lack of abilities in some cases as a run defender, right? And then everybody else, I think, is just all around a pretty good football player. So I think they're going to be able to maximize the skill sets of all of these players. And I'm really excited to see what it looks like in 2025. So I've gone a long time here, right? We're hitting like the 90-minute mark of this podcast, and I talked about 6 players entirely. So hopefully you got a ton of detail on what these guys are able to do, and you're satisfied and kind of have a good understanding now of what these guys are going to bring to the Vikings in 2025. So I'm going to wrap up the podcast here. I am Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football on BlueSky. You can find my co-host Nick Olson at Nick Olson NFL. You can find the podcast at Kindred Skulls on BlueSky. We're available on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, and also available on YouTube. And with that, Skol Vikings.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.